Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ron Trevino, along with Steph Simmons, and the jury has reached a verdict in the manslaughter trial of Tony Earls.
Earls is charged in the shooting death of 9-year-old Arlene Alvarez. It happened on Valentine's Day back in 2022. This is a live look for you right now inside the courtroom. We are waiting for the jury to file in, and we hear the family is just now heading into the courtroom as well.
Yeah, the issue was they were waiting on the attorneys to arrive and the family after reaching a verdict after about an hour.
We know that day 5 started about an hour late as we were in the noon show. That's when they started doing their closing arguments, both the defense and the prosecution. I was speaking with our KHOU 11 legal analyst Carmen Rowe early this morning heading into day 5 on what we can expect. And Carmen, from the start, thought it was a very speedy process from jury selection to how fast they went into closing arguments. And now I'm interested to hear her thoughts about how quickly the jury has reached a verdict. We do know that they went back to ask one question, and it was regarding some video. Yeah,
they basically deliberated for an hour after a trial that took several days, and an incident that happened, 3 years ago. But obviously, this jury was decisive,
And I'm interested to hear our legal experts' thoughts on how often this happens for deliberations to only take an hour, only ask one question, and then we have a verdict. And we understand sentencing, we'll get this confirmed with Carmen Rowe, our legal expert, if sentencing happens immediately after or if that's going to be the next day, if it is a guilty verdict. Now, of course, Tony Earls on this manslaughter charge could walk away a free man.
2 to 20 years is the possibility, and maybe he gets paroled because he doesn't have any kind of felony conviction in his record. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But of course, we're waiting for the verdict right now.
And that could be 2 years probation. It could be as little, it could be nothing, it could be probation, or it could be 20 years, as you mentioned. And as we were talking earlier this morning as well, and as Carmen was telling us last week, this has been a highly emotional trial. And it's an interesting one for the city of Houston. All eyes have been on it for 3 years, as you mentioned. But it is not a murder charge. That murder charge was dropped. We are talking about manslaughter. So for so much attention to be on a manslaughter charge, but it's high in part because we're dealing with the death of a 9-year-old girl.
And we've got a number of crews out there and a number of cameras. There's also one set out in the hallway outside the courtroom. So we anticipate once the verdict is read, we'll have reaction from the attorneys and possibly members of the Alvarez family as well.
Yes, and we do have our legal expert Carmen Rowe on the phone with us right now. Carmen, thank you for joining us once again. It's been a long day for you. We know that you and I spoke for nearly a half an hour about this trial heading into day 5 earlier today. How surprised are you with how quickly this jury reached a verdict?
I'm actually really surprised, Steph. We talked about, I thought there was going to be a quick verdict, but I think we're inside of 1 hour, which is pretty unbelievable considering the 4 or 5 days of testimony, the closing arguments, which lasted almost 2 hours. There's a lot for this jury to consider, but from what I've heard, the jury asked one question, had to do with the state's primary evidence, which was one of the videos with the call outs. And within minutes of that request, they came back with a verdict, which doesn't look good for the defense.
Okay, and Carmen, thank you so much. Please stand by. We're going to go into the courtroom now because we see Tony Earls is seated and it looks like they're about to get going. Let's listen in.
You all may be seated. Who's the fourth person? Is there a verdict?
Yes, there is.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Earls, please stand up. In cause number 1926763, State of Texas versus Tony Earls, we the jury find the defendant Tony Earls guilty of the offense of manslaughter as charged in the indictment, signed by the foreman of the jury, printed by the foreman of the jury as well. Does any side wish the jury to be polled?
No, I'm not, Judge. I don't see a reason.
Okay, you may be seated, sir. Gentlemen, you may be seated. This concludes the first portion of the trial. The second portion is called the punishment phase of trial. And if I could have a minute and speak with the parties, and we'll let you know what the scheduling is. My understanding is someone has an appointment anyways, so it's best to start tomorrow anyways, so I can get everything that we need. So remember my admonishments with respect to speaking with, researching or speaking with anyone about the case. It is still jury trial, okay? So remember all that. And I plan on working tomorrow and hopefully resolving the case. So please make plans accordingly. Every party, okay? Everyone. Y'all have a good night.
All right, go to adjourn.
You all may be seated. Before we conclude for today, I'd like y'all to look at, y'all may be seated, the jury charge. And so my plan is, whatever punishment you have, State, I'd like to conclude it all tomorrow. Whatever punishment you have, defense, I want to finish all tomorrow too. I want to argue this case tomorrow and stay as late as we need to stay to get a resolution in this case. I know people have been waiting a long time. Okay? All right, I'll see y'all tomorrow. We'll stand in recess.
Judge, will they able to have a conversation with the jury? I just saw some of their.
All right, there you have it. Guilty Tony Earls as he stays composed during the reading of that verdict.
That is the end of, or near end of, a 3-year-long situation. This happened in 2022, and it took 3 seconds to give that verdict. So if we do have our legal expert, Carmen Rowe, back on the phone with us. Carmen, your thoughts?
I guess I'm not that surprised. Look, I think this was a difficult case. A different jury could have come to a different result. But I think the state made it clear in their closing argument, clearly persuasively, that this jury didn't need to get beyond one page on the jury charge that asked them whether or not it was reckless to shoot into a vehicle, not knowing who the occupants were, and causing the death of an innocent third party. And clearly, this jury rejected all the other issues and found Tony Earls guilty inside that paragraph.
And Carmen, what was it in that video you think that really convinced them? Because they asked to see this video, and then just moments later, they announced that they had a verdict.
Well, the video was critical, as we talked about, and the viewers have seen on KHOU Plus. This was the video that was so hard fought over by defense because it was a demonstrative that showed what they called call-outs, which designated each of the bullets that went, one towards the aggravated robbery suspect, and then the number of bullets that went towards the truck, the Alvarez truck. And so I think this jury found that the shooting into the truck without enough reasonable information to believe that it was part of the aggravated robbery incident, that this jury focused on those details as regards his guilt. There was one final shot, the 10th shot, that was directed towards the truck as Mr. Earls and his wife were exiting the area. That shot alone could have been found to be reckless and could have resulted in his guilt. Certainly, I don't know as I sit here, and no one knows what was the linchpin, the ultimate factor for this jury.
Do you think the defense could have done anything differently to go to a different outcome?
Absolutely not. I've said this from the beginning, even before we got started. These are all seasoned trial lawyers on both sides of the bar. Anthony Oso is a 43-year lawyer, which he talked about in closing. I don't think there was anything else they could have done. This is just a horrible case with really bad facts that hopefully never occur again in reality. And of course, they resulted in the tragic death of Arlene Alvarez. So now, as we move into punishment, this jury is going to perhaps get to decide whether or not this is worthy of prison or not because he's probation eligible. And I'll tell you, as a trial attorney, it's not uncommon for jurors to say, okay, on the one hand, you're guilty and we have to say that. On the other hand, we don't think you are so guilty of something so horrible that we think you need to go to prison.
What do you think will happen with that sentencing if you look at all the facts here and you put yourself in the shoes of a juror?
You know, at this point, it's tricky because we're going to find out if Mr. Earls has a criminal history, which I understand he does. That'll come out. Additionally, we're going to find any other aggravating factors that the state wants to present, including a criminal history. And then, of course, we're going to hear from the defense, who's going to provide mitigating factors or those that should lessen his punishment, which I would think includes his family, his friends, and other ties to the community that really give this jury an idea of what kind of man he is outside of this particular charge.
Okay, Carmen, we've got a live picture from inside the courtroom continuing, and family members there. What's going on at this stage? Because the judge already said that tomorrow the punishment phase begins. What's going on right now inside the courtroom?
You know, to me, I'm sure this family is in shock. No one thought the verdict was going to come back so quickly. They weren't even in the courtroom. So they all came back. And en masse, they've been waiting 3.5 years for justice for Arlene. And I think you can see on their faces that there's relief, there's crying, and there's some level, I'm sure, of vindication that this hard-fought victory is theirs to cherish now, that they really can hold someone responsible for the tragic death of Arlene. And, you know, that's why they're there with that many people in the room. It's very uncommon to have a family so large take up so many seats in a courtroom. And so it really speaks to how much they loved Arlene and what an important case this was for their entire family.
Some level of justice today, and we'll hear if there's even more tomorrow when the sentencing comes down. Let's talk about the defense attorneys and coaching with their client. We know, and we saw over the days as this progressed, how emotional Tony Earls was in that courtroom. And then when that guilty verdict came down, he was stonewalled. There was no emotion. I'm sure there was a certain level of shock, but do the defense attorneys go back after they take a break before when the jury goes into deliberations and say, hey, you have to act this way or be prepared for this once this happens if it's a very short deliberation?
You know, Steph, that's a really good question. There's two things I'd point out. One, it's my understanding that the defense asked for a lesser included offense this morning during the jury charge conference, which indicates to me that they weren't as confident going into closing arguments today. It was denied, so we never heard about it. But yes, as soon as the verdict came back, there was a little bit of time, and I have no doubt that because it came back so quickly, generally that means the state would prevail. And so I'm sure they went back and spoke with their client and let him know the likelihood of a guilty verdict and how to conduct himself, and then giving him some sense of hope that the fight is not over, that we continue to fight for, you know, his life in the next 20 years.
And some of
Because
these,
that's the
and Karen, Carmen, as you know, a lot of these legal battles can go on for years and years and years. Now, what are the options that the defense might be looking at already in terms of appeals?
Well, so he's going to have the absolute right to appeal, and there's no question this case will go up to the Court of Appeals and then the Court of Criminal Appeals to evaluate all the issues that were presented here. Particularly, that's true if he goes to prison. It's possible that the state could make an offer and that the parties could come to some resolution rather than going to a punishment hearing. But in this type of case, I wouldn't imagine that happening. So if he gets prison time, there's no question he's going to appeal. He has the absolute right to do so. And so all of these legal issues that have been battled over for the last few days will be ultimately decided by the courts of appeals here in Houston.
Next steps for each side tonight going into tomorrow.
Well, they're going to go back and one, talk with Mr. Earls. The state's going to talk with the family, and they're going to have to make some tough decisions because Judge Lacayo was very clear that this case will be over tomorrow. And one day means that each side is going to have to really choose some important witnesses because they're not going to be able to put on all of the witnesses they might want to. So they'll do an opening statement, they'll present their evidence, they'll do a closing statement, and each side will urge this jury to do what they think justice demands. And we'll hear from the state tomorrow what that is. I have no doubt that the defense is going to ask for probation or the minimum, which is 2 years in prison.
Yeah, and Carmen, don't you think that perhaps the decision that the jury has to make tomorrow might be even more difficult than the one they had to make today?
No question. I think if I were on this jury, maybe I can apply the law to the facts and the things, but standing in judgment in a case like this, I think, and rendering a punishment that's appropriate is going to be difficult. But I think that, in my experience, it's going to tell you a lot about what they actually decided on in regard to guilt innocent. So we don't know why they decided he was guilty. But if you believe that this was difficult for some of them, you'll see a sentence that's much lower in the number scheme. And if you know that they were like, look, I wish they charged him with murder, I can't believe it's only manslaughter, you will see numbers much higher on that line. And so the punishment that they give him really will tell you a lot about how they saw this case, even though we can never know what happened inside deliberations.
All right, Carmen, final thoughts after 3 years of this, and you've been following it every step of the way. Final thoughts heading into tomorrow.
You know, this has been a nail biter. It's great lawyers. It's a difficult case. Both parties talked about how difficult the law is. The facts are even more difficult. And of course, then you have all the emotion from both sides. I'm interested to see, in a case that hasn't been predictable at all, what exactly happens tomorrow when everyone gets to put everything on the table and a lot less rules apply.
And Carmen, we're not done with today yet. We know that there has been a podium set up outside the courtroom in the hallway with microphones. So is it possible that we could get reaction from prosecutors and defense attorneys this afternoon?
I would expect so. Just looking at the initial footage, I see Sean Tier, our elected DA, is in the room. I would expect to hear from him. And I think you may hear from the defense attorneys, but in their position, it's a little more difficult because obviously they're dealing with their client, his emotions, and with what they need to focus on tomorrow because they're behind the 8 ball versus the state that's coming in speaking probably primarily just on behalf of the Alvarez family today.
In your own opinion, okay, 3:23 p.m., Tony Earls found guilty of manslaughter. Why, in your opinion, so much attention on this particular trial?
Well, we've talked about it in studio and over the last couple of days. This is a difficult case. We have 2 individuals who are a victim of aggravated robbery. We have a young girl who's the victim of this shooting, a whole lot of chaos in the middle, and the law in Texas applied to all of it. And so a lot of people are fascinated because I think they all have their own opinion about what shoulda, coulda, and would have been done in this case. And it's just, you know, the parties argued it, and it's true. You don't get to pick your facts, you don't get to pick your parties, and you certainly don't pick the outcome. And in this case, it's a horrible outcome from what started as a horrible event.
It's a horrible event, and we have to remind people that it all started with an armed gunman, an armed robber who is yet to be found.
Exactly. And, you know, both parties not both parties, defense counsel argued adamantly, and the state responded that the aggravated robbery suspect should be sitting in Tony Earls' seat and not Mr. Earls. The state believed that the aggravated robbery suspect wasn't the reason that Arlene Alvarez is dead. But it's one of those things where reasonable minds could disagree. And again, I think a different jury could come to a different outcome on a case like this. But now it's tragic either way.
Yes, and now we know guilty verdict. So let's backtrack just quickly if people are just catching up from day 5 today. Can you give us a quick recap of closing arguments on both sides?
Sure. I mean, both parties had different ideas of how they saw this case. The state of Texas has said since opening, and they said it in closing, Watch the videos. It tells you everything. You cannot shoot into a moving vehicle where you don't know who the occupants are. And if you do, you are guilty of manslaughter because your actions are reckless. The defense on the other side says it's not reckless, it's reasonable because Mr. Earls was the victim of an aggravated robbery and he didn't know what he didn't know. That the law requires that he be aware of a risk and disregard it, that he was unaware, and that if he was not aware, that self-defense, defense of a third party, and defense of property justified the shooting, even though the consequence was not what he intended.
Carmen Rowe, we always appreciate your incredible legal insight. Thank you so much for joining us today, for the second time today, we should mention. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen. Again, so Tony Earls found guilty of manslaughter. The punishment phase begins tomorrow. Of course, we'll have a full wrap-up coming up on KHOU 11 News at 4, 5, and 6, and be sure to stream us throughout the day as well. I'm Ron Trevino, along with Steph Simmons.